Hi, everyone. I'm Erica Fogarty, Issue's Vice President of Marketing. Our next panel is on how creative media brands are evolving. With unique perspectives from film, television, and magazine publishing, our moderator and panel show us how digital media is at the heart of connecting audiences with their story, sound, craft, and art. Please join me in welcoming moderator Lauren Alexis Fisher from Harper's Bazaar, and panelist Ghen Maynard from CBS Studios, Mindy Abovitz Monk from TomTom Magazine, yay, and also Carl van Arsdall from Pixar Animation Studios. Woo!
Hi, everybody. How are you? Can everyone hear me? Is this good? Okay, great. Okay, so I'm excited for our panel today because we have an eclectic group of people up here. We have kind of a mix of content creators and creative media insiders. So we're all going to kind of chime in on the evolution of creative media and where we see it going now, especially as so many things are moving towards digital. So does everyone want to kind of just go down the row and we can all introduce ourselves? Just a quick name and position.
So I'm Ghen Maynard. I'm with CBS Studios. I'm Senior Executive VP of Alternative Programming. And basically what I'm doing is I'm starting a studio operation now to supply programming in the alternative world to all the different networks out there.
Hi, everyone. How's it going? My name's Carl Van Something. I'm a musician, artist, and I also work at, oh, I told a joke. And I work at Pixar Animation Studios. I'm a software engineer there, and I've been learning a little bit about the production game as well. I'm happy to be here. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Mindy Abovitz Monk. I'm actually a New York resident. I run TomTom Magazine, which is the only magazine in the world dedicated to female drummers, beat makers, and producers. Been doing that for almost a decade. I also started a contest for female drummers, the only one, called Hit Like a Girl. And yeah, I'll be talking about niche media and reaching larger markets.
Amazing. And I'm Lauren Fisher. I'm a digital editor for Harper's Bazaar. So I write on the website about fashion, beauty, culture, pop culture, a little bit of everything. And I'm going to kind of ask some questions, and everyone's going to give their little 2 cents, and we'll have a hopefully good conversation about the future of creative media. So I just wanted to kick it off with everyone kind of chiming in on their own places in the industry, and what are some differences that you all have been seeing in creative media recently, and how has that affected your job in the industry? You want to start?
Well, so my background was in different parts of television, but usually on the network side. I developed Survivor way back in the day, which sort of started the whole big reality TV kind of boom, and then shows like The Amazing Race and America's Next Top Model, Big Brother, and I've also done some scripted shows. I was the #2 when we did CSI, the original one, and shows like My Name is Earl at NBC, and various other shows like that. So my world is like, how do you get the most amount of viewers that you can to a single creative property? And I think the challenge, to answer your question today, is as social media and various streaming apps, and then Instagram and influencers and all the different groups out there are starting to serve smaller groups of people very well, there's sort of a push and pull struggle going on, I think, in terms of how do you keep a mass of people who each watch divergent stuff in these niche worlds to come and watch a big broadcast show or a big cable show or what have you. So I think that's sort of the challenge. And I guess the one thing I would say is I think there's a push right now to be much more authentic in our world. I think if you look at half-hour comedies, for instance, when reality television came on at first, there were tons of half-hour comedies everywhere. I think reality TV kind of fed into sort of that thirst for authenticity, if you will. And then comedies started to become fewer and fewer. There's still a handful, but I think you can see there's kind of a move towards greater authenticity in television. The challenge, of course, is how do I still get that mass audience while I'm trying to be authentic to various people's experiences. So that's really the sort of push and pull struggle for me right now.
Amazing. What about you, Carl?
Shoot, feature films. While you can get brand new ones on Netflix, people still like to see big movies on the silver screen. And so while there is tremendous change in the world, and changes in the way even the films are marketing, the way that we make films, well, we make them on computers, but the core of the films themselves is, I think, still true, all the way back to the 1930s. And I think that, I don't think that's going away. I think people really enjoy the shared experience of seeing a film and being able to look to the person to their right or to their left to laugh and cry with them. And so I don't see that going away. I think that's still quite valued in our culture.
For both of you, I know coming from a digital standpoint, is there any way that you approach your job differently in hopes that maybe something that you create will get more traction on digital or get more conversation starting?
For me, we still have to work on the mass level. So that's number one. And I think sometimes we don't do as good a job perhaps as we could in terms of feeding all the different niche audiences that are within our mass audience. I think we're doing a better job of it, but it's very different sort of kinds of programming, if you will. But if I had a show that did really well sort of in the digital world, but not on the bigger world, I wouldn't be able to survive. So I've got to still figure out how am I going to get millions of people to come watch this single show, and then from there, hopefully use that audience to feed into other ways that we can monetize sort of that viewing experience online. CBS Interactive, I think, has been very successful in sort of helping to chart that course, but I think there's a long way to go.
I think box office still drives our business as well. And the rest of it is complementary. It certainly helps monetize things after the fact, but first and foremost, people need to go see the films in the movies. As a content creator, sort of on the side, yeah, absolutely. You look at the format that's available, and you tailor the story to fit within that content. People on Facebook don't want to watch a 30-minute video; they want to watch a 2-minute video.
Right.
But I can't say how Pixar's doing that kind of stuff.
Right. And I think now we're entering a really interesting time because there are so many content creators. You don't have to work for a big brand, especially Mindy, I think, can really speak to that. And people are being self-starters and starting their platforms. Their own media platforms, and so I think that raises the number of people who are creating content and the amount of content that we're getting. And for you, Mindy, how do you think that what makes content stand out? How do you personally make content stand out in a sea of so many?
Well,
creators?
so I think right now TomTom's in a similar position to what Ghen brought up earlier, which is we initially in 2009 were serving a niche audience, which was the female drummer community, and we've grown in the last 10 years to where we're now a medium-sized media company, which has the same sort of threats and issues that I think larger and other medium-sized media companies have when we're up against social media influencers and even more niche, even more direct messaging to smaller audiences. So we're struggling in a similar way to figure out how to go back to our roots and or create more niche media under a larger umbrella, or how to move forward, because I have found even in this short period of time, in 10 years, so much has changed. So, and this is a great topic to discuss, which is what comes next when everyone's a media maker. I 100% took advantage of that in 2009 when it felt like it was just cracking open and not everyone was taking it by the horns. And now it seems like everyone has, and the money is definitely being meted out across, to the brand new media maker now and the much smaller media maker. So I created a medium-sized company. So I'm in a similar sort of where do we go from here, and constantly thinking and evaluating how we do that.
Yeah, and in terms of TV and film, what do you think makes great content today?
I came up with a bulleted list for this one. First and foremost, and I think Patrick had said this too, which was passion. I think passion is number one. Tooling is number two. Talent is number three, and authenticity is number four. And I think if you take those four things, the rest of what you need will manifest itself. I really think it will. The commitment, the drive, all those things will come out of those 4 bullets.
Very good bullets, actually. I love that authenticity, I think, is so important now, and we're seeing that, especially in digital. You know, if you don't have an authentic voice and a point of view that you're really, you know, sticking to and taking, it's hard to stand out in a crowd of so many, you know, different media companies. And
I want to add, I love every single bullet point you put out there, and I feel like the one other bullet point I'd like to infuse, and that I think is important, but maybe it's a slower burn, is integrity.
Oh, totally.
And I think that obviously, like, potentially what some of our companies have, and the folks who have been working at this for a really long time have, is integrity, intention and purpose, right? And all the other qualities I think you mentioned are what bring up new media makers on the rise to the forefront. But ideally, I hope it will be integrity that leaves those of us around who, you know, really care about this and really want to make the media landscape what it should be.
Yeah. It seems like the early era of Facebook has brought to our attention that we need more truth in our lives. Absolutely, and so I'm happy that I work for a media company that believes in that, and I'm happy I'm sitting next to people that believe in that too.
Well, I guess if I would add 2 more values, I would say integrity is important, authenticity, but I think escapism is sometimes very undervalued too. And I think sometimes when you come home from a hard day of work, you don't want to watch some television show that's so authentic and so, honest about what it is that you're like, okay, I just want to turn it off because I just had a lousy day and you're being too honest now. So the question is, how do you get sort of that authenticity and honesty, but also have some fun? And the other thing I think a lot about is how do you bring people together? Like, I think it's really interesting that you were saying that drummers aren't the only people who, are your audience, that you extend beyond that because there are various values that apply to a lot of people, even if they may not have been your core group from the very beginning. And obviously on the sort of broadcast or even in the cable world, you're trying to bring people together. So the constant struggle is you want to sort of be something for a lot of people, but sometimes when you're that, you're nothing for anyone because it's just milquetoast. So how do you come up with something that's specific and authentic and yet has meaning for so many different people? And I think one reason Survivor has lasted as long as it has is it's one of the few shows out there that gives voices to everybody from red states to blue states, old and young, across the board, and allows each person to sort of play their own game, if you will. So it isn't just a matter of highlighting just one kind of group of people. You see everyone across the board, and sometimes by virtue of how the game gets played out, you might have one year which ends up being more blue state at the end or one that ends up being red. But in the very first Survivor, if any of you are old enough to remember, our Final Four was really kind of cool because we had a corporate director who's big city and who was gay. We had a young female college student. We had a crusty old Navy SEAL. And then we had a truck driver from the South. And that there was like the perfect 4 different kinds of people you could have for a broadcast network. So sometimes you can get lucky like that. But for me, it's like, how do you do shows that bring people together? And I think especially today in the sort of polarized world that we're living in, a lot of this stuff online feeds various smaller groups, if you will. But I think there's a place for movies and television to try to also bring everyone together in some sort of a common experience.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think going off of one of the points you made is that I think now with the internet and media companies and influencers in general, a couple years ago there was this pressure to be everything and say everything in media and cover everything. And I think that now there's been kind of a change in people really focusing in on, what their brand represents and what their company represents and what voice they're going to present to people and, connect with people on a more meaningful level. So we definitely have noticed that change in digital as well. But for you all, who do you think are the major players in creative media right now? Who are the brands that are getting it right, besides your own?
I think there are a whole lot. I mean, there's just various different worlds. It's a tough question to answer. But I think that when I look at specific TV shows, I'm always looking for what's that show that comes out of nowhere that grabs a group of people. So, for instance, when I was at NBC, we developed a show called The Walking Dead. And then there was a big organizational shift. A lot of us left, and NBC passed on the show. And then it went to AMC, which at that time, honestly, very few people watched. And the show got higher ratings than any show on broadcast network. So the fact that you can have a show that somehow brings a mass group of people together, and I think what's brilliant about the show is a lot of shows that are about zombies or strange things happening become all about the mythology and the sort of the sci-fi-ness of it all as opposed to the characters. But that show across all the years has done a great job of really portraying various kinds of characters that everyone can relate to. So you may not be from the same town as a certain character, but as a mother dealing with a child, you relate to that part of who she is. And it's such an interesting world that it's something fresh that appeals to everyone. And Empire, the first year on Fox, I think was sort of the same thing where people found it. And you know, in a lot of ways, it had a lot of stories that were straight out of Dynasty, if you're old enough to have watched that show. But it was repackaged in a different way, and it felt contemporary and new with great music and fantastic actors. And so I think it is possible to pop like that. So I think for me, I just look more at what are the shows that sort of resonate with a big group of people that prove you can get an audience if you're really, Roseanne last year when it came back, you know, again, got a mass audience. In certain big cities, it got like a 50 or 60 share, meaning that 50 or 60% of the people with televisions on were watching that show. That's unheard of today. But it showed there was a huge thirst for a program like that, and yet it did very well in New York and LA at the same time. So those are the things I probably aspire to.
I actually don't know how to answer that question because I'm in media, and a lot of the people I've been in the last several years looking up to have recently folded. Rookie Magazine is moving on, and Nylon's no longer in print. And you know, I'm constantly studying the media landscape, specifically in the feminist or targeted towards girls and women arena, and everyone's on their toes. And so I think who is doing a really good job is literal individuals, and I'm studying them. Ghen and I spoke about wanting to reach a really large audience, and that's still our primary goal. But I'm watching these individuals reaching larger and larger audiences, and studying them almost seems like impossible to do. And I'm wondering about their longevity of what they end up becoming over time. But one thing I continue to think about that they all seem to have in common is this subject of authenticity that we're talking about. They're very true, they're very real, they're honest to themselves and to their audience. They're sharing their daily lives on stories in every possible way. And I'm not sure how a company like mine or some of the bigger companies that have been around for a longer period of time adopt those similar traits, that deep level of honesty when we have, we've kind of all put up a facade that we were asked to do for so long of professionalism and maybe like a corporate barrier between us and them, so you don't actually know who we are necessarily. So I think who's doing it really well are these individual social media influencers right now. And I'm studying them, and they've also always been our subjects. So now I'm thinking, okay, cool, are we just an army of influencers? That, you know, so yeah.
It's a good question. For the influencer, I feel like micro-influencers have really been rising, and so many people are looking to them for those things. Is there something in particular about the people that you follow that makes them stand out, you think?
100%, yeah. They're all the people, like I said, they would or have been subjects of our magazine. They're inspirational in that their stories stand for more than just themselves. Their stories resonate. And within TomTom, we've always aspired to tell pretty much anyone's story who hasn't been told, or an underserved group of people. And so I feel like these social media influencers are exactly that. They have a group of folks who are identifying with them directly. Yeah.
Did you have anything you wanted to add, Carl?
No, I think she covered it.
Yeah. And kind of going into my next question with that, I think that, you know, bringing up social media and stories especially has been such a huge way for not only, you know, individuals, but media companies, I think, to connect with, you know, consumers on a more personal level. And in that point of view, how do you think that people can really take advantage of things like stories and, you know, certain social media platforms to create content that more people will see and engage with? I
mean, for me, I think you have to be honest as to what your platform is and who your audience is. So For instance, The Amazing Race one season had a season where they had a bunch of YouTube stars and influencer type people who were racing around. The ratings were actually a little less than Amazing Race normally gets. And I think that kind of shows that, with no disrespect to the people in it, because some of them were very interesting people, you know, Amazing Race in the end wasn't about that. And the world of a YouTube star, for instance, isn't about Amazing Race. So even though they may have had like a lot of fans in the YouTube world, you know, the way you tell stories there is so different than it is the way you tell a mass audience. And part of the YouTube star, I think, isn't just about that person. It's about that person in this particular platform, in this particular form of storytelling that really resonates. And then if you take the person out of it, I'm not saying you won't find occasionally some people have the potential to become stars on a mass level, but it doesn't necessarily translate one-to-one. So I think you have to respect what your world is and the form of the story that you're telling.
Yeah, I just want to riff off of that for a second. Like within TomTom, we have a tone of voice for every platform. So we sound different on every platform, and you have to address the medium. If you're on Twitter, you know, it's just words. If you're on Instagram, it's just visuals, and there's a different lightness to each platform or heaviness. And I've lately been calling our print magazine our slow food, because it's so carefully curated and we want you to take your time with it. And obviously our junk food is our social, and we've got our digital landscape, which is our like medium food, whatever. But I totally agree with you. I can't bring print into Facebook. It doesn't work. So, and that extends all the way to your identity as a person. So I totally get what you're talking about.
It's an interesting point, because for me at Bazaar, you know, I started there 5 years ago, and at that time, our brand was really just a print brand. We had just kind of started in the digital world, and social media at that time was something a lot of publications didn't really know how to navigate and, you know, translate their print brand to a digital audience. And I think since then it's changed so much. And like you said, you know, the voices that we use are, you know, we still stick to our brand, but it's a different kind of voice that we're connecting with people. You know, I think when you look at print magazines, they're very authoritative, and, you know, you're telling people, you know, what they should like, what they should do, which is, you know, normal of media creators. But I think when it comes to digital and this new kind of world we're entering, it's more of like, you know, we're not telling you what to do, we're guiding the conversation, and we're engaging with people. You know, we want to kind of connect and engage in meaningful ways, not in ways that feel like you're pushing your brand on someone, you know, in ways that make your brand feel like a friend, or, you know, somebody that people can connect with on a deeper level. So it's interesting how that, I don't know if it's affected either of your positions at all, but I think it's something for print and digital that's really been
Well, what you say kind of resonates in a different way for me, which is product placement. Because when we did Survivor initially, you know, product placement, it's funny, in the old days of television, product, you know, soap operas were made by, you know, soap companies. I mean, advertisers were very involved, but you didn't see too many products being put into shows. And, you know, viewers hate it when you suddenly get sold a commercial in the middle of their entertaining show. But there's a way to embed that commercial, if you will, that doesn't necessarily put one out. So for instance, on Survivor, you know, we would often say, you know, if you have a bunch of people who've been drinking nothing but muddy river water for like 14 days, and suddenly they play some game and the winners get, you know, a can of Mountain Dew. But it's not just a can of Mountain Dew. When you cut close to it, you see the little beads of water coming down the can, you know, and you see these hungry faces out there been eating nothing but, you know, rice and a few vegetables and dirty muddy river water for weeks. And then you open it up and you hear the fizz and you pour it slowly into the cup and you literally look at their faces. I mean, you're looking at hungry people savoring at a can of Mountain Dew, you know? So, and that's real. So now suddenly Mountain Dew is becoming an interesting part of the story where it's actually relevant, organic to what's going on with these people. And that becomes very valuable. So it's, for me, when you talked about sort of like, how do you stay sort of organic to, you know, who you are, I think, you know, I often think of how are we embedding products and speaking to those brands within our show in a way that doesn't have people turning the channel because now they feel like we just betrayed our show. But how do you bring sort of those two worlds together in a way that works well for both partners?
Yeah, the current media platforms, they provide an interactivity that you don't get out of print or you don't get out of seeing a movie in a theater. And so while I can't say what Pixar is doing in that regard, as an independent creator myself, this interactivity ultimately feeds the machine. This is the data that feeds the algorithms that breeds discovery. And so creating content and figuring out how to get people to engage with it through these interactive mediums is really important, I think, in getting your name out there. And I'm sure that the big media companies are probably doing the same thing.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have anything you wanted to add?
Well, in terms of talking about authenticity, integrity, and sponsored content, which is something you just brought up with the Mountain Dew, we've been struggling with that because most companies now, most of the companies who market with us want a kind of integrated marketing that's so seamless. And you find that with the social media influencer. They're, oh my God, I got this like lip gloss, check it out, right? And we're a company and we're excited to do a very similar thing. So we have thus far been incredibly transparent with all of our marketing. It looks like an ad, it feels like an ad, it smells like an ad. But we're being asked a lot to do this sort of integrated advertising, and I like just hearing what you had to say about that, creating an authentic experience on camera. So yeah, I mean, I feel like yeah, you gotta pick your battles, you gotta figure out what you're really trying to accomplish here, and it has been slightly disheartening to see most people's marketing budgets heading towards individuals who have followings on literally like Instagram, and taking it away from companies like, like legitimate magazines, legitimate television shows. But I find it's all a challenge. It's all a challenge, and everyone in this room is intelligent, and we all scrutinize our media. We all know what's happening to us. So I think it's just a really exciting time to figure out how we get through this, how we're going to get our media, what we're allowing. If we spend 2 hours on social media, or if you guys have activated your phones to let you know your 15 minutes are up or whatever, if we're submitting and to what degree, and it's totally a relationship with the viewer, the consumer, and then us, the producers. So, you let us know what's happening, and I'm just sort of like checking in all the time to figure out where we're heading.
It brings up a good point too, I think, because we all work in different forms of media, but I think as a whole, what we're seeing, and this isn't even true of just now, it's always been, media has been largely funded by, advertisers and brands that want to get their products advertised. So I think now that we're entering, more of a seamless kind of digital world where everyone can kind of see, what we're posting and understands what sponsored content is, it creates kind of a murky situation of, what is real and what makes, how can we make content that feels truthful but still get paid to do so. And so I think it's a difficult thing for everyone to navigate, whether you're, TV and film or digital and print.
I think it depends on how much you're willing to admit that you're who pays for what that you get to experience. And if you know full well that the experience you're having is being brought to you by American Express, then you should know, and I think there's also, I think some audience don't want to be deceived or sold to in any point of their day, and so you'll see them being angry. You'll see them get angry,
And a lot of people get really angry with sponsored content, and it just turns them off completely. I mean, and they don't want to engage with it at all because it doesn't feel real.
I'm smart enough to know what I want to buy.
There you go. There you go. And then you'll have, but then you'll have then you'll have the argument of, okay, well, how does anything get paid for then?
Exactly.
Or you got this for free, didn't you? Or you paid $10 for your cable, and now you're seeing this show. So how do you expect it to be there? So there's a really good conversation there, and I think one thing I hope that you all do and we all do is engage with our media and let our media know, I'm not okay with this. I don't want you to sell me this right now in this way.
Right.
But I'm okay with you selling me this in this way. A real good conversation about the ethics behind it all.
Yeah, I personally don't have a problem paying a premium for good media. I'll do it for the movies, I do it for music, I'll do it for my favorite TV show, Doctor Who. A lot of folks, they feel like, oh, I paid for cable, so why should I pay for anything else? I've already paid for enough. But I think when you have good enough content and you can get the audience to understand the value of the content, they are willing to pay for it, particularly if there has no ads to it.
Yeah. What do you all think the future of creative media is? Where do you see it going in the next few years?
I think it's going to go to the YouTubers. I think it's going to go to the independent media creators. I don't think film and TV are going to go away. I think the production costs are substantial.
Right.
It's going to be a long time before the person in that building over there makes Game of Thrones.
Right.
I think we know that and we're willing to pay for that. But even now I watch TV shows made by YouTube people.
I'm like lost at sea. I have no idea. I think what you had said behind the scenes earlier about just like trying to get a mass audience, trying to be a niche, we're all trying to do all these things all at the same time. And I feel like the pie has been split into a kind of slivers. I can't even imagine the fraction of pie, like pieces that are out there. I don't even know. And so I actually don't know, but I do think it's in the hands of individuals, like similar, I think it's YouTubers, I think it's influencers. And I'm excited to see where that goes, but I'm not sure if we're gonna have a frame of reference anymore, minus Game of Thrones. We're all gonna be talking about something we've seen that our friend has not seen, possibly.
Yeah, I think broadcast television, cable, and movies will still always be around. I think we all go through cycles where we have to do a better job of reaching that mass audience. I'm more interested to know, where's that YouTube star going to be 20 years from now?
Mm-hmm.
Like, are they still going to be able to keep their audience, or will that audience be long gone? And what's scary about that is a lot of these YouTube stars, I mean, sometimes I meet with them and I'm serious, it's like they come into the office and I'm talking to them and they're sitting here doing this in the meeting while I'm trying to talk to them. And you sit there and go, wow, like once your thing is gone, like what are you going to do? So I'm curious, like on an individual level, what's going to happen to a lot of these people. Maybe they'll be brilliant enough to be able to, in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, keep that audience. I don't know. But that to me is interesting.
What would you call that thing that you're seeing?
What do you mean, when they're sitting doing this?
Is it, yeah, what would you call that?
Productivity.
Rude.
What? I totally agree with you, but if everyone's doing it, is it ADD? Is it like?
I think they live in their own world sometimes. We did a show recently where we had a bunch of influencers and someone was doing this when the exec producer was trying to give instructions and he literally said, dude, hold on, And you're like, man, you're working for this person. And it's like such a different reality that they live. And yet, when you have like millions of people who are attached to you through this, that is their world. And so it's fascinating, but a little scary at the same time. So.
We have a no phones during meetings policy, so I can't relate.
Smart meeting. That's true. I think everyone is so, glued to everything on their phone that it does create an issue at times because you have that kind of hunger to be connected on every platform and knowing what's happening and, representative of who you are as your own brand. So it's an interesting dynamic. But I'm going to open up for questions in a few minutes, but I just wanted to end with kind of a more difficult question. For all of us, really, how do you see creative media kind of bridging the divide and the gap that's in our country and bringing people together in the future? Do you think that there's a way for creative media to kind of unify people?
I mean, 100%. I think the more voices you have in the room, the better off you are. That's what I work on within TomTom. So the fact that it seems like almost everyone with internet and a phone is unleashed and can speak their truth, that is to me incredibly powerful. I don't care what our administration says. We can mobilize, and social media does exactly that. It mobilizes people. Hopefully it inspires people, and hopefully you don't feel as alone if you identify with someone who feels confident in speaking their truth. So for me, I absolutely love it. It's a creative medium. People are storytelling. They're visually inspiring, and yeah, if I could, I want everyone to feel like they're empowered, and I do think that social media does just that, and the creative, yeah.
I like the idea of empowering people and having a diversity of points of views, but I think that one thing that sometimes creative entities, especially the bigger ones, need to put a check on is stop lecturing people too. It's one thing to try to put up something that you believe in is a good thing, and I think there's a way to do that, but when you live in a country that has very divergent views, I think it's much more interesting to see a conversation between those parties. It's funny because if you think of a show like All in the Family, which I still think is one of the great sitcoms in television history, you know, a show like that would be very hard to get made today because it's almost scary to put out different points of views. But one thing I've come to appreciate about that show that I don't think I necessarily quite saw in the same way 20 or 15 years ago is that for their divergent points of views, and as much as Archie and the meathead would scream at the top of their lungs at each other about politics and what have you, at the end of the day, they were still family. They loved each other. And I don't think that's a point of view I see as often today. And I think it's a point of view that we could use a little more of, which isn't to say that I'm right and you're wrong, or you're right and I'm wrong. Maybe we can both coexist and still find a common bond. And I think that's where broadcast television in particular could really have a real contribution to make.
I think if there's one thing the country needs, it's more understanding. Kind of to your point, the family understood each other and was able to see past whatever the divergent viewpoint was. And so stories provide us a way to understand people other than ourselves as well as understand ourselves. And so I think if we keep telling stories and keep telling authentic stories, stories that reflect real life but go deeper than I think the sitcoms of the 80s ever did. I think by telling these stories and taking risks and telling broader stories, telling stories about trans people, for example, I think these are going to help America as a whole come to understand that, well, that person's not terrible. They might be awesome, I don't know, but they're not a threat to me, and maybe I can have a conversation, because right now no one's talking.
Right. And I think all forms of media are so, we're seeing that now in the state of, what's happening in our country, that TV, film, personal essays, feature stories are also important in educating people and getting people not only to understand, but to be more empathetic to other people and compassionate. I think it's a really big role that media, we all have as media creators.
I just wanted to add that while I love the idea of every single person having a voice, I think that now that we can kind of tailor our media, that it does create this echo chamber. And I think what you're bringing up, Ghen, is like, how do we show people that you can have differing conversations and still be a family or still get along? And I think that if you're tailoring your own media like we all are doing today, it's much easier to shut off every voice you're not interested in and decide they don't exist, they don't deserve your time. So I do think that a solution for that moving forward would be a really incredible.
And by the way, if you want to influence people, I'm not suggesting that that should be the #1 goal, but if you want to, for instance, create a sense of greater inclusivity for a certain group of people, shoving a certain point of view in front of everyone only to get a lot of the audience to turn the channel isn't going to help you in your goal either. So if you think in terms of historically on television, once upon a time you never saw gay people on television. I read a poll recently that showed that a small majority of young evangelical adults support gay marriage. I don't think that would have happened if it weren't for reality shows in all these years actually portraying that. But on Survivor, we had a gay person who ended up winning the first season of Survivor. But we didn't have prominent gay characters on CBS at that time. So that was very forward-thinking. But I think you have to respect that there's a process when you're trying to impact culture. And maybe there's a way to try to show different people without ripping everyone apart in the process to be able to do that and use the baby steps that sometimes have more effect in the long run than just lecturing people. So.
I totally agree with you, and I think this is the power of the Netflixes and the YouTubes, because now we have services that can reach very specific groups of people, while broadcast network and the broadcast audience, maybe they're not ready for certain stories, but those stories can start to be told and they can start to be shared. And then we can hopefully move broadcast media faster than we have in the past, because now we have big data.
Absolutely. Great. I'd love to open it up if anyone has, oh, okay, yeah, right there.
Hello.
Hi.
Hi. I guess I should stand up. My name is Mallory Lance. I make a publication, and one of the things that Mindy said that I thought was really interesting was that more and more advertisers are pushing to get more sort of seamless branded content, and I've noticed that very much so. And I think that in learning about how I wanted to forge my approach for Ravenous, I came to a conclusion of keeping print very specifically content focused with no advertising at all, and then looking at alternative venues for advertising. And I wanted to ask you guys, as content creators who have to have a certain element of branded content within your creations. Whether you have any issues with like the FTC regulations about how, I mean, it is there are very clear regulations about how to keep advertisements, keeping advertisements specific to making it very clear that they are advertisements, and I think that it is somewhat unfair for brands to sort of strong arm you into doing more branded content without being very clear about that, and I wanted to ask you if you've had any issues with kind of standing your ground while producing content and doing it in a way that's not going to sort of inadvertently slip in some branded content.
I just think it's a really slippery slope right now, but I feel like you should answer that question.
Well, I mean, in my world, you know these are the commercials, these are, I'm not sure that the issue that, or challenge that you're talking about necessarily quite applies to my world. There are certain things that I will do just in general, though, or I won't do in general, because I know will scare away certain potential advertisers that we may want to have come to the show. But I wouldn't say that that the issue you're talking about is one that I...
Well, I think that when you were talking about sort of like formulating your content based on making Mountain Dew seem exceptionally more interesting, do you feel like maybe as a larger, coming from like the broadcast background, there aren't as many regulations on you, or do you feel like
yeah, I'm not, I
things are
mean, there
changing a
may
little
be,
bit?
but I'm not really aware. I mean, you know, in there it's Mountain Dew, so we're being honest. I can't say I've ever done something where there's a product and you have no idea that you know what I mean? Where we're doing in that level, it's clear it's a Mountain Dew thing. I'm just trying to make it much more relevant to what the overall story is for the show. But in terms of saying you can and cannot do that, that's not something I've had to deal with.
Yeah.
And maybe there are some rules, but I've never had to deal with it practically.
I think too, like for us, I mean, you know, we obviously at Bazaar we do branded content, and as you all know, you know, fashion, beauty media obviously does a lot of branded work. But for us, you know, if we do branded content, we mark it as branded content. You know, there's no hidden tricks or anything. If it's sponsored, we're saying it's sponsored. But I think one of the things that we have done in order to, you know, make it feel like our brand is we have our own branded content studio. And although something may be sponsored and we may be getting paid to post something or create a story, that doesn't, you know, affect the kind of story we're going to create. We're still going to create something that we believe in, that's authentic, that is true to our brand. And while we're still, you know, highlighting a product, I don't think we'd ever do so for something we didn't believe in, and we wouldn't do it in a way that didn't feel true to our brand. So I think especially with digital media, that's kind of the way to work around that and to fuse that into your workflow.
Yeah, and I would say as content creators, and you're a content creator as well, we're being incredibly transparent about this is how we make our bread and butter is sponsors and marketing. So as discerning consumers of media, you should already be fully aware of the fact that everyone's looking for a way to catch you when you're asleep at the wheel to sell you their product. So if you didn't know that, you do. Be hyper aware of that. Be super vigilant about how you consume your media. Companies like my own need to survive and thrive, and we may end up doing lots of sponsored content moving forward. So the drums you see sold in our magazine will likely be sold to you in ways in which you were maybe not aware you're being sold them in that moment. But that's kind of, it's the game right now. It was the game. You were mentioning soap operas. It'll probably be the game moving forward, and maybe you think it's more transparent with social media influencers. Maybe you think it's less because they're so authentic. But it's all a game, and it's how much you play it, and just stay awake.
On a macro level, there are times people will pitch me a show where I'll go, that sounds fun. There's no way I'm going to be able to get the sales group aboard on it, you know? So you take a show like Cops, remember on Fox? Used to be Saturday, you know, and that was considered groundbreaking television at the time, and I can appreciate it on that level. But that's not a favorite show for sponsors. I mean, you're cutting into crime situations live, essentially, and granted they're live to tape, but, you know, you don't want to come out of someone puking all over the place to a Dunkin' Donuts commercial. So, you know, so there are shows like that where you go, it may be very entertaining, but it's not exactly going to be sponsor friendly. So to the extent that we are based on advertisers, that certainly influences on a sort of macro level the kinds of shows that you may see or will not see.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Go ahead. Hey, I'm Seth Travis. I'm the editor and founder of a magazine called Metropolis. And I wanted to just mention a couple observations about content and media that are coming out like right now that have made me kind of go, oh, wow, pay attention more closely, and then hear from your perspectives of like maybe a brand or a platform or a film or some type of creative production that's coming out that's really gotten your attention and said they're really figuring out what's happening, you know, in 2019 and beyond to keep their audience, keep their viewers, keep their advertisers. So seeing like Deadpool coming out soon as like it's being recut just seems super genius. GQ has a new editor and they've changed the font and size of their layout and their art direction. They're kind of cleaning house and refreshing. And then Glamour is going super digital with just a couple of exclusive prints next year. Those are the things that have kind of gotten my eye and my mind and kind of grinding my gears to make sure I'm paying attention to that stuff. And I would love to hear from the four of you of what are the things that you guys are seeing out there where you're like, oh, they really get it. They're going to be disruptive. They're going to make sure they're keeping the attention of their customer, their viewer, et cetera.
I love experiential. I mean, if you're having a really incredible time or you've learned something or you've seen something you've never seen before, I feel like that's incredibly impactful. I see media companies moving in that direction, creating conferences or parties, get-togethers. And I think, but for me personally, the most interesting things I think are happening right now in media are being done by individuals. So it's refreshing to hear you mention larger media companies that are inspiring you. I more am watching them sort of lie down and go to bed while like this seems like this like rising force of individuals are coming up from under them. So I'm paying a lot of attention to individuals right now and wondering how we navigate that as a medium-sized media company.
Is there an Instagram person or a blog person that you're bookmarking or that you're saving or that you're screenshotting that you go to every morning?
There's a lot of them, actually. There's a lot of them. And what they all have in common is they're brutally honest and they're really forthcoming about in every moment of their day. So that's just in my own personal world.
Yeah, my perspective, I guess my big media perspective is people are thinking a lot about streaming and how do you make content for streaming, though that's like an anecdote, I think, to what Pixar is doing. Personally, I think the disruption, I don't think any of the big media is disrupting anything. I think it's kind of more of the same, and I think disruption's coming from local art communities who are free to take all the risks they need to. Take a look at Meow Wolf one of these days. They're doing some amazing work. And I think it's groups of people like that that are really going to make the next wave.
Yeah, I wish I had a good answer for you. I kind of agree. I think we need to be more disruptive on sort of the bigger player level. And I think we go through cycles again where there are networks or companies that are disruptive. I think we could use a little more disruption right now.
I agree. I think that there's, a lot of work that needs to be done, and a lot of media companies are kind of going through the same growing pains right now. And it's interesting to watch how brands are dealing with that. And I think for me, personally, I love the companies who are kind of blending together a couple different mediums, whether it's, video and social media, but also still sticking to feature stories and words that still are meaningful and, not just this total pivot to video. That's like the 2-minute videos that people want to watch on Facebook. And, there's still meaningful stories being told through different mediums. And I think that when a brand can balance, video and feature stories and social in a way that feels new and meaningful, that's kind of, for me, what sticks out the most.
My question is directed to Mindy, because I think you probably have a close relationship with your readers because of your company. We've talked a lot about advertisers and sponsors, but I'm curious about user-generated, reader-generated revenue and how you make decisions around what content is free and what content costs your readers money.
So when I was just getting my start, Vice magazine was a couple blocks away, and they were maybe 3 years in. And I just had an intuition that this company was going to be really big, and we mimicked nearly everything they did minus their integrity bit that I had mentioned earlier. So I have always felt very strongly about my audience having the the least barrier of entry to our content, including our high-end print content. So it's available for free in Ace hotels. It's been available in music festivals around the world. And we kept our costs low for years and years and years. And so in terms of users paying for our content, that was the last thing I ever wanted to do. I also feel like clearly the subject matter being female drummers, I felt we had never been seen as a viable market, and I felt this was our time. And our due that we were owed was to be given our content free, paid for by the drum industry that had been benefiting from us and will continue to for so many years. So my politics kind of run through the background of my company too, as you can tell. I still feel that way. I still feel really strongly, but as Mallory was saying earlier, there's the idea of sponsored content's always on the horizon. Getting involved with larger companies who want what's fast and new is always there, and we're growing, so we want to keep up. I've thought about the subscription model, which we haven't brought up yet here in this room, that everyone subscribes to at least 5 to 10 things monthly here, and that would really help us grow and thrive, and that might be something that we charge our users. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I've been through it myself with my publication, and you're trying to strike a balance, you know, because Facebook and Google really just are gobbling up the entire digital space, and it's in terms of digital advertising, and it's.
They really are, and we were talking earlier about niche versus big media, and it's sort of like, cool, so you get a total handle on the niche, right? I have taken over all media directed at female drummers, beat makers, and producers, right? So you reach the drum industry and you think, shoo in, I got this. But then you reach the health and lifestyle brands and they think you're too small. You reach, you know, so it's a really delicate balance here where you're trying to go for everyone, and then you're also going for a very clear market. And how do you describe your product? How do you describe your audience? How do you open the minds of marketers? Right?
Any other questions?
Hi, I'm Carolina. I'm the editor-in-chief of Hoop Magazine, which is the only fashion magazine at Columbia University. Yeah. So this question is towards Lauren and Mindy. You talked about how Rookie Mag just kind of shuttered, and Glamour's canceling print, Nylon is canceling print. Where is women's media going at this point? Kind of like, where do you guys see it going? What do you think women's media can do better? Stuff like that. Yeah.
I hope we're taking over the world. I hope women's voices are getting louder and stronger, and we're just using the different platforms in different ways. Obviously, we're an incredibly powerful gender, and we should be heard, and I'm hoping that these individual avenues are letting us be able to express ourselves really clearly. I love Hoop. I'll let you answer, because this is, yeah.
I think, for me, a lot of people are fixating on print, and obviously print is going through a lot of, as I said before, growing pains, and people are kind of struggling how to make it still relevant and profitable. But, I think for us, it's a matter of balancing all of, print and digital and all of our social platforms, and I don't think because these print magazines, are shuttering that's like the end of women's media. I think if anything, it's just women's media is going in a different direction. And for us digitally, I think that's really great because we can reach so many more people. And personally, at Bazaar, the past year or two has just been such a huge change for us. We just launched our first ever digital cover this month, yesterday actually. And so we're entering this kind of new world where we're separate from our print magazine, but we both are still connected through the brand, and we obviously work together. But I think, it'll be interesting to watch how brands handle it. For us, we've been cutting back on coverage in the past that we used to do based on Facebook clicks and what would get people clicking, and now we're more focused on quality and, giving more women voices. This year we've added so many feminist freelance writers who write these really deep and meaningful feature stories for us. And I think for women's media, in the past, you had this industry where you could only talk about, what to wear and the best lipstick to buy and what shoes you should wear this season. And now we're kind of taking those concepts and bringing them into ways that are more meaningful. We can still talk about shoes. We love shoes. But, we're talking about more than just that, and we're giving women more than just that. We're giving them more things to think about and interact with and be inspired by and empowered by. I think it's an exciting time. You know, there's obviously a little bit of panic right now, but you know, I think it'll be interesting to see how brands navigate that. And if anything, I think it'll just be more incentive to, you know, reach more people and create content that's more meaningful.
Yeah, and Tavi's here today, and it's really exciting to think about where she came from, and then Rookie's position now, and you know where she's going is going to be incredible. So it's sort of like, where is she going? Let's you know, just, yeah. So I think it's an opportunity, actually, if you think about Rookie and Nylon and where everyone's heading. There's just space for new voices to jump in those spots, like yours.
Amazing. Well, thank you, everybody. Oh, sorry, one more question.
One more question. Hi. My name is Peter Crosby. I work with a company called .sub. We translate video, audio, and text into lots of different languages. How much are you using accurate translations for your different publications and different media to reach new audiences, to extend your global reach?
I mean, for me personally, Bazaar, we have international editions, so it's probably a little bit different than some of the people up here with me, or maybe not. But so we each have our own digital international edition. So, you know, we obviously would like to reach as many people as possible, but I think with our brand, we have brands kind of all across the globe, which is an interesting dynamic. But I don't know if that's different.
That's a great question. I don't know if we do all that much of that outside of you know, shows that are distributed later on, but in terms of what airs on television, we certainly do closed captioning for the deaf, but aside from that, that's an interesting question.
So we have an international department. We translate the script such that it's culturally sensitive. We, in fact, will re-render signs in other languages. I think in Inside Out, we changed the toppings on the pizza to be more sensitive to Japan. So we're quite aware of what's going on in other places of the world, and we try to make our movies work with those cultures without compromising the core of the film.
I like that you're basically introducing something we didn't talk about, which is like a global reach, which is obviously on the horizon of everything relating to the internet, because everyone can access it for the most part. And I think it's a really great question. I think in less than a decade from now, we'll be talking about just that. How are we communicating? Are we doing a good job?
But in terms of global reach, certainly that is very relevant because our content, we want to distribute worldwide. And, you know, it's a balance. Sometimes a show that could be a hit on the network may not be the biggest hit elsewhere also. So you want to have a balance of shows that hopefully sell across the board. At the same time, you don't want to turn down a hit show for this country, even if it may not be the biggest show in China or Japan. So the balance.
Do we have any more questions, or we're all good? Okay, great. Thank you all so much, and thank you, everyone. Thank you.
In a minute, is it on? Yeah, okay. So in a minute, Audrey will be back up to tell us what's happening for our next period of time together, and we're going to be going to lunch. But before we kind of get into a little bit more of the logistics around that, I just wanted to remind everyone, like, this is an extraordinary group of people sitting in this room, and I hope you'll take time. I know at conferences people get a little bit shy, or they go off and check email or things like that. Take some time to get to know the people around you. We have publishers and who are totally dedicated to their content and creativity. Everyone in this room's lives are dedicated to design, creativity, telling a story in one form or another, from the largest media companies in the world to emerging publications. And it's unusual to actually have this time together. We happen to have literally the world's leading expert in magazines in the room, Samir Husni, who has been, we were talking last night, he actually has a collection of magazines that dates back to the early 1900s. And literally, is the world's leading expert in magazines. He, for those who don't know him, he goes by Mr. Magazine. And he's one of the many extraordinary people that we have with us here today. We have people who are putting together content that is really connecting human beings to what they care about and moving this world in great directions. So say hello, get to know each other. This is a group of people that you'll want to be engaged with, I think, moving forward. One other quick note, there's been a lot of talk about Rookie today. Tavi is joining us later this afternoon. And I think it's also, just for a bit of context, she's in her early 20s, but she's actually been doing Rookie for like a decade, which is amazing, right? Like she started doing this and building a media company and a media brand and a platform to do a whole range of really interesting things. So it's an honor to have her with us and actually the whole set of people. And really thank you to all four of you for joining us as well. This is unusual to get the whole sort of gamut of media and content creation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So thank you once again, Lauren, Ghen, Carl, and Mindy for today's talk. We again also would like to invite you to check out our Instagram at Issuu and check out our stories of the day. Be sure to be hashtagging #AlwaysBeTelling. But right now we are going to break for lunch. If everyone can go down to the public kitchen down on the ground floor, we will be serving you lunch, and then we would ask you to come back to your seats around 1:10 for our third panel. Thank you.